You all know how the saying goes, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and I think that's what Liberty Media is hoping with this new race in Las Vegas, which was probably the worst kept secret in the sport in a very, very long time. And it's probably the biggest thing to happen to Las Vegas since a postman with a brain injury decided that he was going to change the future of the whole region. But it's not the first time that Formula 1 will host a race in Las Vegas, because back in the 1980s they visited Caesar's Palace. Like, actually visited Caesar's Palace. The race was held in the Caesar's Palace car park in what was probably the most bizarre racing venue ever created. This race, meanwhile, will actually be on the streets of Las Vegas, with part of the track being on the famous Las Vegas Strip. Cars flying at 200 miles an hour past the casinos and hotels, among them being the MGM, the Venetian, and the location of the previous Vegas race, Caesar's Palace. The track layout will look something like this, and when turned on its side, it looks like a Moomin. And it's not the first time that this idea has been pitched, because back in the 90s Bernie Ecclestone was determined to get a street race going on the streets of Las Vegas, but the casinos were against it because they didn't want the roads closed and therefore potentially lose a lot of business. And Bernie kept trying and trying and trying and trying, but they just would not budge. But now, because of things like Drive to Survive and the general increase in popularity of Formula 1 in America in general over the last few years, they've changed their minds. And this race will be a joint venture between Formula 1, the casinos, the hotels, the City Council of Las Vegas, and probably Clark County as well. Put simply, well, Las Vegas won't be paying any hosting fees for this race. And that's got people riled up, because the only other race that didn't pay any hosting fees was Monaco. Was being the operative word, because Formula 1 is now demanding fees from the Principality for the privilege of hosting a Grand Prix. And you might have often seen news in the motorsport media that more often than not Silverstone struggles to pay up, given it's one of the few, maybe even the only track or the only event on the calendar that doesn't have any central or local government subsidies. The bill is footed by the BRDC and the circuit itself. Which then gets people asking, why doesn't Las Vegas, a brand new track, not have to pay any hosting fees, but the classic tracks like Silverstone, Monza, Imola, Spa, Nürburgring, Hockenheim and so on do have to, and often struggle to pony up the cash? It gets people saying that Formula 1 has now become all about money, but to be fair, F1 became all about the money when they decided to run the 1976 Japanese Grand Prix because of TV rights, despite the drivers saying, no, it's too dangerous, which led to Niki Lauda's 1 and a bit laps and park it pro gamer move. The other point being made is, why do we need another race in America? Formula 1 has become too American now. But the thing is, Formula 1 has had a very, very tough time of cracking the US market. Motorsport in North America, Australia and Europe is pretty big, but in the United States, and only in the United States, is Formula 1 not the most watched motorsport. But it is getting there. In 2021, an approximate number of 935,000 people watched F1 in America, while 1.2 million on average tuned in to watch IndyCar, with both sports having TV figures higher than in 2020. In fact, last year was the most watched IndyCar season since 2016. The other thing is, the United States is a pretty large country, and the population is spread out a lot more evenly than somewhere like Canada or Russia. The United States has massive population centres on the East Coast, the West Coast, and in the middle. And yes, while the United States does have that population spread, the East Coast is still where most Americans live. But with only one race in Texas a year, that's a mission for a lot of people to get to. But compare that population spread to somewhere like Canada, where a substantial amount of Canada's population lives in the 700-mile corridor between Hamilton, Ontario and Quebec City. And while a Grand Prix in Vancouver would be pretty cool and would be quite a picturesque city to host a race, and kart held races there once upon a time, it's still a very small audience potential, because most of the population lives on quite literally the other side of the country. See also Russia, which was going to move its Grand Prix from Sochi to St. Petersburg, which is a city much easier to get to, and St. Petersburg in general being a much bigger city, and people from Finland could drive in or fly in, and people from Sweden could drive in and fly in as well, much easier for everybody to get to, but because of current events, let's say, that's no longer happening. So then you get a race on the East Coast in Miami, a race in the West ish in Vegas, and a race in the middle in Texas. It all seems like a doable thing. And actually, back in the good old days, 2 races in the US was a common thing. There would be the US GP and then the US GP West, as it was often known, with 8 races being held at Long Beach between 1976 and 1983. And in 1982, there were 3 races in the United States. One was in Detroit, one at Caesars Palace, and one at Long Beach. So adding one more to ensure that there is a race for every region of the United States' population centres, on paper, that does actually sound like a good idea. And to be honest, while the layout for this Vegas street race looks a little uninspiring and like a fictional Finnish children's character, a race under the lights in Vegas might not be great from a sporting perspective, but from a marketing one, it's brilliant. And I'm sure people would rather the track be at a real circuit, but it's hold a street race, or build a whole new track. Neither of which are a particularly good choice for the purists out there, and as much as people would wish it to be at one of the American tracks that already exist, places like Sonoma, Watkins Glen, Laguna Seca, they're just not doable. I mean, there is Road America, but that's like a 2.5 hour drive from Chicago, and just logistically, it probably won't work. However, this all puts some races in Europe under threat. The addition of a 3rd US Grand Prix has put the French Grand Prix in doubt, and it's nice to see people finally care about the French Grand Prix after spending the last 4 years whining that Paul Ricard is crap and shouldn't be there. There's also fears for the Belgian Grand Prix and also the British Grand Prix as well. Now, the Belgian Grand Prix has been on the calendar for a very, very long time, with some exceptions, such as when they moved it to Zolder while they, improved Spa, and also the 2 years it was cancelled because of the standards of the track and also a row over tobacco laws. Now, the British Grand Prix was the first ever Formula 1 World Championship race held at Silverstone, and the race itself has been one of only 2 Grand Prix that have been on the calendar every single year, with no exceptions. The only other one to do so is the Italian Grand Prix. Again, not always held at Monza, but it's always been there. Silverstone is a race where it's always sold out, British driver doing well or not, same way that Monza is always packed with Tifosi, Ferrari doing well or not. And while Formula 1 cars whizzing past the casinos under the lights of Vegas does sound cool, F1 is now in a very precarious situation. With the ditching of Sochi and the addition of Vegas, Qatar and possibly the return of China, we're looking at 25 races. Formula 1 can run a maximum currently under the Concord Agreement of 24. So which one goes? Well, at the end of this season, 3 circuits are out of contract: Mexico, Spa, and also Paul Ricard. And I'm sure people would be wanting Paul Ricard to go because it's the track they like the least out of those 3. I don't think people will be upset to see Barcelona go either, because it's that track that they've done so much testing at, they're just way too familiar with it. But Stefano Domenicali is saying that it's not good enough for tracks that have just history anymore. They've got to be commercially viable, which is something that Spa and Silverstone at least have on their side, and Mexico City as well, given how popular Checo Perez is at the minute. And as Formula 1 tries to recoup its losses following the pandemic, where it lost upwards of $900 million in 2020, they're now in this precarious balancing act between tracks that can pay up and help them recoup those losses, but also have the traditional races that the fans love and can provide, the sporting side of things. I guess what I'm trying to say is they need to find a way of actually making the sport financially viable so we can actually have something to watch, but also have those tracks where the cars can go around and actually have the sporting side of it as well, because, Formula 1 is a sport, but it still needs that commercial aspect to actually keep it running. So then a look at the revived 2023 Las Vegas street race. I mean, it does look like a cool prospect, all those lights and stuff, but the track itself just looks a tad uninspiring. But, let me know what you think down in the comments section underneath this video and get a discussion going, because it is, after all, why I do these opinion pieces. And while scrolling down, if you think what I've said has given you food for thought or has carried a modicum of weight, then do give it a thumb up so the algorithm can do algorithmy things, and also subscribe if you haven't already, and get the bell on so you never miss out on a future video. Big thanks to the good folk of Patreon for their continued support, and if you do want to help the channel at a more personal level, you can join Patreon by following the link in the description, where there will also be links to Discord and also to my socials. So until next time, I've been Millward. Have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Goodbye.